Okay guys, welcome back to what is I think the 4th episode of our Asteroid game. Today we're going to be carrying on with working on our asteroids today, but first, before we start our asteroids, we need to fix two things. The first one is we had that little bug with our, what is it called, our player. Whenever we shoot out a bullet it kind of rotates a little bit, so we need to fix that. And then the next thing is we also need to destroy the bullets once they have reached the boundary of the scene. So remember, we added in our colliders on the edge of the screen around the game. Whenever they collide with that, we want to go ahead and destroy the bullets straight away. So we're going to do those two things quickly first, and then after that we're going to start creating our asteroids and adding all like the references and everything that we need for them. So let's jump straight into Unity here and see what we have to do. So obviously I've got a plan here. We're first going to try and fix the bullet shooting bug, then we're going to destroy the bullets on collision, and then after that we will kind of carry on with creating and adding everything we need for the asteroids. So let's jump straight into our project here. So let's quickly play this and see what bug I'm talking about. So at the beginning, if we press the space bar, or if we click the button on our mouse, you can see that when we shoot out a bullet, our player actually rotates a bit. So that is something we want to fix quickly. So let's go and do that. So this is actually got to do with the bullet is actually colliding with the player. So we need to go and change a few settings in the project settings to tell our player not to collide with our bullets, and vice versa, our bullets not to collide with our player. So before we do that, let's go ahead and add in some new layers. First we need to add in a player layer, and then on layer 7 we'll also add in a bullet layer, just like that. So if we click on our player now, we can go and add in our player layer that we just created onto our player, and then if we click on our bullet, so this is our bullet, we can go add in the bullet layer that we just created onto our bullet, so that should be fine. So now if we go to our file, I think, and then project settings, it's probably in build settings, and then player settings, I think it is. Yeah, so if we go to here, we can just drag this in here, put that there, just in case we need it later on. So under project settings, you want to go to physics 2D, and here you'll have the layer collision matrix, and this is where we want to go and tell our bullet to not collide with our player, and our player to not collide with our bullet. So to do that, we're just going to untick these three boxes here, so that way our bullet won't collide with our player won't collide with our player, and our bullet won't collide with our bullet. It's kind of confusing, but neither of these two objects here will collide with each other, so that should fix our problem. So let us go and play the game and see if that fixes anything. So after this, hopefully this works, and after this we will go and destroy the bullet whenever it collides with our our colliders here. But for now, let's go and you can see now whenever we click on our mouse button or our space button, we are actually launching some bullets, but our player is not actually rotating as it was whenever you launched. So to rotate the player, you actually have to press the arrow keys or the A and D key. So that is working perfectly fine. So now you can launch as many bullets as you want, and you can also rotate the player, but the player doesn't rotate on the launch of the bullet, so that's fine. So the next thing is we want to go into our bullet script here, and we just want to add in a on collision 2D enter function here. So let's go and say on collision enter 2D here, and whenever this method gets called, this is where we can just destroy the bullet. So here all we want to say is destroy this dot game object, so that is going to destroy whatever game object this script is attached to. In this case it's the bullet. So if we go back to the Unity editor here, we can go and play our game, and now whenever the bullet collides with our colliders along the edge of our screen, it should get destroyed. So it will look like it's actually flying off of the screen, which is what we want, but it's not actually doing that. You can see if you look in the hierarchy, you'll see the bullets getting spawned into the scene, but then also get destroyed when they reach the edge of the screen. So we can go and launch as many as you want, but you can see now that they no longer just get stuck to the edge of the screen. So that's exactly what we want, so that's perfect. So we can go back to our schedule here, and we can tick off that, and now we can go ahead and start working on creating our asteroid game object. So let's go and do that. So what are the first thing we need to do? We need to create an empty object for an asteroid, and then we also need to add in a sprite render onto it. And then we will go ahead and start importing the assets that we're going to use as the pictures for the asteroids. So in our hierarchy, let's just double click on player. So here we can zoom out a bit. So here in our hierarchy, we're going to create a new empty object, and we'll call this, what is it, asteroid. So we're going to create this as a prefab later. We'll drag it into our prefab folder, but for now let's go and set it up how we want it to do. So what do we want to do? We want to add in a sprite renderer. So this is going to be used to set the actual image of the game object when it gets spawned. So here we'll drag in the sprite that we want to start off with into there when we import them in a bit. So we've added a sprite render, so we're going to do that now. So let's go and import the images. So I've got them on my desktop here, but I'll see if I can put a link to them in the description, or maybe you'll have to download them off of the Git repository of this project. But for now, let's go and import them into the Unity project. So we put them under our art folder. So now if we click on our asteroid here, we can simply drag in, I'm going to drag in the first asteroid into our sprite here, just so we can actually see something on the screen like that. And then what else do we want to do? We also want to add in a rigid body to that, and we want to go and set a few of the properties of it. So let's add in a rigid body 2D, obviously because it's a 2D game. So mass is fine, we'll set that as 1. We want to set the drag to 0, and then also the gravity to 0, so it doesn't float or fall off of the screen, it's floating in space. So we can go ahead and check those off, and we also need to freeze our rotation. We're going to freeze our rotation on the z-axis here, but we will add in some rotation when the asteroids get spawned into the scene, so that they all look kind of unique and different, so then they're not just like moving from right to left or up and down without any rotation, because that's not really how asteroids move around in space. So what's next? The next thing we need to do is we need to add in a box collider. Then we are done with our prefab, and then we can go ahead and drag that straight into our prefabs folder. So let's see, add component. Here we want to add in a box collider 2D again, obviously because it's a 2D project. So let's go and customize this bit. So we will make this a little bit smaller just for now, because we'll just make that like that for now, just because we're actually going to change the size of some of the asteroids randomly when they get spawned in, just to make them all look unique, like I said. Otherwise the game would be a bit boring because they would all look the same. So that's fine. We can go ahead and save the project, and now we can drag in our asteroids prefab that we just created from our hierarchy into our prefabs folder, and that is going to create a prefab out of that. So now our asteroid is a prefab, so we can pretty much drag in as many as we want, but we don't want to do that. I'm actually going to delete all of them out of our scene, and then later on we will actually spawn them in through an asteroid spawner programmatically. So for now we'll go ahead and delete that out of our hierarchy, so it's no longer in our scene. And the next thing we need to do is we need to create a script for our asteroid. So create a new C# script, and we'll call this asteroid. That, and then I'm going to go back onto our asteroid prefab, and in our inspector I'm going to either drag and drop in the new script that we just created, or you can scroll all the way to the bottom when this loads. Let's just collapse all of these. So you can add in another component just by simply typing in the component. So here we will add in an asteroid script onto that asteroid game object, prefab, whatever you want to call it. Or you can simply just drag and drop the asteroid script onto there like that. We've already added it in, so there's no need to do that. So now let's go into our scripts here, and we can start editing this asteroid script. So we'll delete all of that because we don't need. I don't think we need our start method. We'll keep it there just for now. But I don't think we need an update method, so we'll go ahead and delete that. So for here, we need to add in some references. And what is the first one we need to add in? So we've added our box collider, we can take that off. We dragged our prefab folder, we've made our asteroid a prefab, so we can take that off. We've also added in our script for our asteroid, so we can take that off. And now we're going to work on our references. So we need a sprite renderer. We also need a rigid body reference, so let's go ahead and do that. So for this, we are going to create some references here. So here we want to say public, or do we need to say private? We will say private for now. If we need to access them, we'll change them. So private sprite renderer. This is going to be our sprite renderer. Like that. And then what was the other one we needed? Our rigid body. So here we also want to have a private rigid body 2D, and this we'll just call rigid body, like that. So now we want to go and get our awake method, so we can assign these references that we've just created to the components that we added onto our asteroid prefab. So for that, we'll go and say underscore sprite renderer is equal to get component. It's going to be a sprite renderer, so it's going to look for any sprite renderer that is attached to our asteroid component. And then the same thing for the rigid body. We'll go and say underscore rigid body is equal to get component rigid body 2D. So that's going to do the same thing. It's going to get the rigid body 2D component off of the prefab that it's attached to, so obviously the asteroid. So that is fine. So what is next that we need to do? We've done our references, we've created our two new references, and we've gone and got the above two in our wake method. That's what that meant. So now the next thing we need to do is add in a sprite, we need to assign a sprite to our asteroid component at random. So instead of having instead of having here, if we click on our asteroid, so here if you look on our sprite render, here we assigned our first asteroid as the sprite of the game object asteroid. So instead of just assigning the first one to our game object, we want to go and do that at a random. Like every time you create a new asteroid, it needs to be random so that it will look different. I think we have 4. Let's just check. So we have asteroid 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see. Can I open these? Okay. Well, you can look here in the top corner in the spectra. You can see the first one is this one that we're using. The second one is slightly different, and so is the third and the fourth one. So they're all different shapes. So to do this, what we want to do is we first need to create an array. So an array of sprites. So private sprite, if I can spell it properly, private sprite, and this is going to be our sprites. Again, if you can spell properly. So hopefully that error goes away. There we go. So now that is fine. So now we can go ahead and drag and drop those in on our asteroid prefab. So we'll double click on our asteroid, which we don't need to do because we're already in it, as you can see. So if we click on our asteroid here, we should get the array on our script, which we don't. And that is because we made it private, it needs to be public, my mistake. We'll save that, we jump back in here. Now it should be the same thing. We now should be able to see an array of sprites when it eventually loads. So So here we go. So here is our sprites. So here we can go and add in 4 of them. So we have, because we have 4, so let's go and drag in the first one, drag in the second one, drag in the third one. There probably is a quicker way to do that, but I'm just going to, just because there's only 4 of them, we'll just drag and drop them in there. So we'll save that. Then we can go and have a look here and see what we need to do. So we still need to set our random asset. So far we've only created an array of our random asteroid pictures, sprites, whatever you want to call them, but now we need to go and actually assign a sprite to the asteroid. So to do that, we're going to do that in our start method here. So here we will say, we'll take our sprite renderer and we will assign it a sprite. So we'll go and say underscore sprite renderer dot sprite is equal to, then we're going to assign it a random sprite from our sprites array. So we'll say sprites. Why is it not coming up? So sprites, and then in here we need to say a random value, so random dot range, and then obviously we want to give it a range between 0 and the number of sprites that's in the array. In our case it's 4, but just to be to eliminate any errors, we're just going to use the sprites.length, so that we'll check the length of the sprite and never assign a value higher than what the maximum amount of objects are in the sprites array. So obviously the minimum is going to be 0 because an array index starts at 0, and the maximum is going to be our sprites dot length, like that. So that should be fine. And then what is the next thing we need to do? So the next thing we've set our sprite a random asset, which we've just done. So now we need to set the rotation. Then we need to go ahead and set the scale, and then we also need to add in a size limits. So we are actually, when we spawn an asteroid into the game or the scene, we're gonna set random sizes so they don't appear on this in the game at like all the same sizes. So to do that, let's go and set some limits in our sprite class. Sorry, not our sprite class, our asteroid class. So here we want to create not a method, but a public float, and this is going to be called size. And we're probably going to start off with a size of 1 for now, and then we also want to create a public float minimum size. We'll probably just create that at 0.5 for now, so then we'll set that equal to half of the like starting size maybe. And that was supposed to be an F, sorry. And then we also need a maximum size, so same thing, public float max size, and that is, we will set that to 1.5 like that, just for now, the F. So that is fine. So now whenever we start the game, we want to go and set a scale for our asteroid. So set the size of the asteroid that we want to instantiate into the game. But if we look at our schedule here, we also want to set the rotation, so we're going to do that first. So to do that, let's go and say this dot transform dot Euler angles is equal to a new vector, where to go, vector 3, and then here we'll set 0.0 f on the x-axis, 0.0 f on the y-axis, and then on the z-axis we want to set a random value, so random dot value, and then we want to times it by 365.0 f. So that is going to give it a random rotation value, which is exactly what you want. So we'll see that probably in the next episode when we start instantiate them into the scene. And then the final thing I think we will need to do is we need to set the scale of it. So I am going to go back into our script here, And then the last thing we do here is one simple line of code, and this is to say set the local scale of our asteroid that we spawn into the scene, so we can change the size of each asteroid. So here we'll say this dot transform 7c4. Instead of Euler angles, we'll say local scale. If it comes up, there we go. Local scale is equal to vector 3.1 times this dot scale. Sorry, not scale, size. This dot size, like that. So that is now going to set a random scale to our asteroid when it gets spawned into the scene. Instead of doing this vector 3.1, you could say, what is it, vector 3 and then 1, 1, 1, like that. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just a shortened way of doing that. So instead of writing that long piece of code, we'll just say vector 3.1 times this dot size. So that should be it for our asteroid script. Obviously now, because we haven't created our our asteroid launcher, well, not a launcher, our asteroid spawner, we don't actually have the capability yet to spawn them or even see them in the game yet. So if we go and play the game, you're not going to see anything different. We will start working on our asteroid spawner in the next episode, on Wednesday's episode. So obviously, like I said, you can't see anything, so anything you can do right now is to rotate the player and move him up and down and shoot bullets. But yeah, like I said, in the next episode we'll start spawning our asteroids into the scene, and you'll be able to see everything that we have done in our asteroid come to life. But for now, that's it for this episode, so thank you so much for watching again. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and like the video, and also subscribe to the channel and turn your notifications on so you don't miss out on the next episode if you're following along with me. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in Wednesday's episode. Goodbye.